Does this also apply to other kinds of justice movements? If somebody, for example, doesn't participate in racism or sex trafficking, is it also their moral obligation to participate in activism against racism and sex trafficking? Hey, what is up, guys? So I was doing an Instagram Q&A the other day, and somebody asked me if I think it's a moral obligation for vegans to do some kind of vegan activism. So I figured I'd use answering this question as an opportunity to make this video, considering how complex this topic really is. This video is going to more so be a viewing of the way my raw thoughts go when thinking about this topic. Basically, I'll be thinking out loud for the majority of this. So when answering this question, it's going to become very important how it is we actually define the word activism. It's a pretty broad term. I'm going to be defining vegan activism in a way that I think most of us agree is vegan activism in the way that we normally see it. If I define vegan activism as participating in some form of formal protest, starting and sending petitions, uploading vegan activism social media content online, doing outreach in the streets, or debating people in social media comment sections, it becomes hard for me to believe that these kinds of actions are morally obligatory for vegans. Of course, I believe that being vegan is a moral obligation when you practically can be one, but considering it morally obligatory to do the things I mentioned really doesn't compute for me. Whenever I try to figure out whether or not a position is reasonable, what I'll do is look at the logical extension of viewing such a position as reasonable. If being a vegan isn't enough and one ought to be a vegan activist, does this also apply to other kinds of justice movements? If somebody, for example, doesn't participate in racism or sex trafficking, is it also their moral obligation to participate in activism against racism and sex trafficking? These are the kind of questions that make me hesitate to consider a vegan participating in vegan activism to be a moral obligation. Wouldn't I have to hold this kind of position for every kind of social justice movement? What if there is a vegan who decides to dedicate the majority of their time to doing environmental activism or support some other cause outside of veganism? Are we to consider this vegan to be engaging in immoral behavior? How far can we truly take this? And don't get me wrong, guys. I'm clearly aware of the utility that vegan activism can bring to the world. It's one of the main reasons I myself so actively participate in it. But on the moral landscape, there are multiple ways in which a person can generate utility in the world. And I truly just cannot bring myself into calling a vegan immoral who decides to participate in ways to make the world a better place outside of veganism. If I'm being honest, guys, the vegans who so vehemently claim that vegans have to be a vegan activist remind me of the toxic intersectional vegan space on Twitter, which claims that vegans are racist for not incorporating human race issues into their animal rights activism. Oh my God. Your veganism doesn't talk about people of color, you're racist. Your veganism doesn't talk about minorities, you're racist. Your veganism doesn't talk about trans people, you are a transphobe. It definitely isn't a perfect analogy, but I would say that they're the same in that both positions lead you to a state where you have to do activism for all kinds of things at once. To get out of this absurdity, I've heard some vegans make the claim that the nature of the vegan movement is unique in that it fights for the voiceless, and therefore it is a moral obligation to speak on behalf of the animals and commit to vegan activism in the form I went over in the beginning of this video. Now, wouldn't this argument apply to environmental activism though? I mean, the environment technically cannot speak for itself. I guess a person operating under this reasoning could be consistent so long as they themselves commit to doing activism for every cause which involves protecting that which cannot speak. Or does this logic only apply to voiceless sentient beings? In that case, I mean, is there a social justice movement for mute people? Would those vegans be morally obligated to participate in that kind of activism? Some vegans will also say that the amount of suffering derived from animal agriculture acts as the morally relevant difference between the vegan movement and others and justifies the idea that it is a moral obligation for a vegan to be a vegan activist. Doesn't this apply to things like environmentalism as well? I mean, surely the suffering derived from the route toward an uninhabitable planet due to climate change would entail an immense amount of suffering. What about the threat of nuclear war? I mean, of course, operating under this logic, one would have to establish a kind of suffering or potential suffering threshold in which an issue not being solved warrants it becoming a topic we consider a moral obligation to do activism for. As a little side tangent, I'm also curious how these vegan activists who think this way view vegans spending their leisure time where they're not doing any activism. At what point does it become no longer morally obligatory to engage in a kind of vegan activism? I, for one, am not always doing vegan activism. Sometimes I chill with friends, play video games, and other things that aren't necessarily vegan activism. Do vegans who think this way also have a morally obligatory amount of vegan activism that they think vegans should be participating in daily, weekly, or monthly. Is periodically doing some activism also not enough? Where exactly is the line? I'm honestly just curious at this point. So I'm not too sure what else to say on this topic besides asking you guys what you think. But when I reflect on it, my thoughts are pretty clear. Let me know if you disagree with me. Let me know if you agree with me. Let me know if I'm just canceled or you think I'm not a real vegan, because I don't think that it's a moral obligation for every single vegan to do the kinds of vegan activism I went over at the beginning of this video. Let me know everything that you're thinking. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude, even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude, even vegans don't get your weird, stupid